Please the court. I'm actually going to start with a reading, and this is from the book of Isaiah. And the reading says that he was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. We turned our backs on him, and we looked the other way. He was despised, and we did not care. This passage has been on my mind for months. It comes to me every time I work on this case, which is a lot. And this is such a profoundly sad case. We have two kids who did not know each other, should have been home Monday night. Two kids who collided horribly and tragically because of malignant influences of Devante's older friends who did not lose their lives, older friends who, comparatively speaking, are going to walk away from what they set in motion. My role in this case is not to act as an advocate for Wyatt Reeb, but I will say that my heart is heavy for him. My heart is heavy for how he died. And after working on this case for over 10 months, it is still difficult to find the right words to talk about this utter catastrophe. My role is also not to make the enormous decision today of what should become of the rest of Devante's life, or to live with that decision, or to answer for it, any of the responsibilities that fall on the court. I recognize the difficulty of this decision, for Your Honor, and I do not envy the court. As hard as my role is, I'll take it. And my role is to advocate for Devante, who had just turned 17 a month before January 20th. So he was too young under the law to buy cigarettes, too young to drink alcohol, too young to get married, too young to sign a lease, join the military, all because the law recognizes that teenage brains are not the same as adult brains. The U.S. Supreme Court pointed to three big differences. First, teenagers have a lack of maturity. They have an underdeveloped sense of responsibility, and therefore they're reckless, they're impulsive, they take risks. The second difference the Supreme Court noted was that teenagers, and this is a big one here, Your Honor, teenagers are more vulnerable to negative influences and outside pressures. And as the court said, including from their own family and their peers. They have limited control over their own environment. They lack the ability to just remove themselves from, again, the Supreme Court's words, horrific and crime-producing settings. The third reason the Supreme Court said that teenage brains are different. They said a teenager's character is not set in his ways like an adult's. His traits are less fixed, his actions are less likely to be evidence of irretrievable depravity. Now, all of the Supreme Court's observations would have been totally true for a kid who stole a car. That kid would be a viable candidate for juvenile court, for treatment, for a future. And all the Supreme Court's observations are just as true, though, for a kid who commits a murder. But by and large, kids who are charged with murder stay in adult court. It's just the way it is. Somehow we think that a kid who's vulnerable to malignant influences cannot make a good choice to not steal a car, but we think they can make a good choice to not chase down and stab another kid. To me, it's a messed up state of the law, and it is what we have. It is what we're stuck with. I know that the court is looking for acceptance of responsibility. I know that, I honor it, I honor that the state is looking for that. This is a painful point in Devante's case. On July 16th, Devante pled guilty to the second-degree murder of Wyatt. And that was a day of accepting responsibility. As the state noted, he did get a benefit for that, but he did also spare Wyatt's family from a week-long trial, spared time and expense for the state, for the court. And the court has the report of Dr. Sims in the pre-sentence investigation, which shows that when she saw Devante on July 8th and 9th of this year, he was on a track for reckoning with these events and with his actions. Then a month later, on August 16th, it changes. The media reports Devante's plea on August 15th, and for the next several days, all the smartest people in the Panhandle are sharing their opinions about Devante and his family on social media. And Devante's on the phone for most of his waking hours in the days that follow, talking to some of the big influences in his life. And by the time we get to August 20th, which is when the probation officer interviews Devante, our probation officer is hearing statements that cause him to report that Devante is now minimizing his actions, that he now is not accepting responsibility. And I know that has to make the court deeply concerned. I urge this court to recognize that change for what it is. And I know that one way of looking at it is blaming everyone else, but the other side of that coin is that it's hard evidence of how vulnerable this kid is to the biggest influences in his life. He was vulnerable to those big influences who said you don't need to go to school, and so he can skip and then he can just quit. He's vulnerable to those big influences when he learned how to fight. He's vulnerable to those big influences when he learned how to drink. He was vulnerable to those big influences on the night of January 20th, when the Rotherhams bought him and their son a whole bag of 99 shooters. Vulnerable to those influences on the night of January 20th, when Dimitri Enriquez says, "Get in the car, we're going to catch those 308 boys who stole my mom's car." Those big influences have created chaos for Devante's whole life, and Devante lives in it. And look what happens after he's arrested, after he's taken to jail. No more chaos. Now there is structure. Now, suddenly, he can finish a class instead of giving up and quitting. Suddenly, Devante can become cooperative and courteous with detention staff, not just for like a manipulative hour or two, but 10 months and counting, that he's eased into structure. Physically separate Devante from those big influences, and he's a different kid. The problem is that those influences are still in his life. Devante's father, his mother, Dimitri's mother, Dimitri's brother, Corey Jr.'s mother. When he hears from them, what is he hearing? And we know that after August 15th, after the media reported his plea and all of the brilliant comments on social media, we know that things turned after that. And the court's aware, for example, that Devante wants a different appointed attorney. At this point, this 17-year-old kid who cannot process the seriousness and the permanence and the reality of this whole situation. And he sees his dad as the only person that's fighting for him. That's how he sees it. That's the lens through which he's viewing the world. He is not capable of processing it any other way. He is not capable of seeing what is in his interest. He can't turn away from those big influences, from his dad. He can't filter out whether what he's hearing will help him or hurt him, because he's 17. And that's how a teenage mind works, especially when the loudest voices and the biggest influences in a kid's world are also malignant, in a way that the kid does not understand. When the biggest influences in Devante's life showed him, day in and day out, that conflict is resolved by screaming and fighting and kicking doors in and putting each other in chokeholds, well, that's what Devante internalized. When the biggest influences in Devante's life brag about kicking a kid with their steel-toed shoes and putting the kid in the hospital as street justice, well, street justice is what Devante internalizes. When the biggest influences in Devante's life say, "You don't need to go to school, I don't care," from kindergarten until he finally just quits at the age of 16, well, that's what he internalizes. When the biggest influences in Devante's life say, "It is fine if you hang out with criminals, with a family of criminals. We'll even send your little brother over there for after-school care." Well, that is what he internalizes. When the biggest influences in his life hand him a bag of 99 shooters from the convenience store, give him some weed, give him some pills. Don't matter if you're 17. That's what he's going to internalize. When the biggest influences in his life carry an AR-15, pull guns on other kids, tell big stories about shooting up Reconnect and pulling guns in drug deals. That is what he internalizes because he doesn't have another voice competing with that. When those influences communicate to Devante day in and day out, you never back down, you can't be a bitch. The most important thing is that the streets know you are hard. Well, that is what he internalizes. And when those big influences in his life see him trying to kill himself, see him getting put in the hospital in Denver and behavioral health in Johnstown and the 5th floor of Regional West, and they show him they don't care enough to get him some help, that is what he internalizes. With that kind of poison pumped into his mind and his body and his heart and his soul every day by one of those big influences or another, he never had a chance. If he had the fully formed adult brain that the law says he should have, then on the night of January 20th, when Dimitri Enriquez screams, "Get his ass, homie," as Wyatt is running for his life, then what Devante would have said is, "You get his ass. It's your mom's car that got stolen. This ain't my fight." That's what he would have said if he had a fully formed adult brain. But he didn't have a fully formed adult brain. And he was drunk on booze bought for him by the Rotherhams, and for all of his 17 years. But the malignant influences in his life taught him is that you gotta be hard. They didn't teach him about grief. They didn't teach him about death. They didn't teach him about pain. They didn't teach him about loss. And they sure didn't teach him about consequences. Consequences for the people he hurts. Consequences for himself. Consequences for anyone. And so Devante did what he was taught. On January 20th, he still had sutures in his wrist from his most recent suicide attempt because no one cared enough to say, "You do matter. You are a child of God, and let's get you some help." Instead of that, what the adults taught him is be hard. And Devante did what he'd been taught by every malignant adult influence in his life over 17 years. Wyatt Reed didn't do anything that he deserved to die for, at all. And Devante doesn't deserve the death in prison penalty because he never had a chance. Never had a chance. Well, what do we do now? I believe, and I think from Ms. Allen's comments, I think the state does too, that all of us have a path to redemption. Not redemption without consequences. He committed a murder. But redemption as in confronting the damage that you cannot undo, and then taking the steps, all the steps, to live better. Who agrees with me on this? The Nebraska Department of Correctional Services. You know, DCS promotes its ability to rehabilitate offenders. Education, vocational training, mental health, substance abuse, helping offenders become pro-social, helping them recognize that the old ways of thinking are harmful, helping them find new ways of thinking. Rehabilitation is what DCS is set up to do. It is their business. And if we take DCS at its word, then Devante has a true and a legitimate chance to become a better person. He can throw himself into those programs. And he can receive counseling, he can receive substance abuse treatment, he can learn why school matters, he can get a diploma. But Your Honor, because he is 17, he is not at the place yet where he can process, become better for the sake of being better. It's going to take an incentive, and the incentive I am asking the court to give him is hope. My request is a sentence that is a range of years so that Devante knows and the corrections professionals who work with him can know that there is a reason to get better. There is a reason to not just give up and give in and just become the worst person he can be. That there is more to life than a street reputation, especially when street reputation has only caused heartache, harm, and death. As the state noted, and as the court has seen in my memorandum, I am asking that the court set the low end of the sentencing range low. The statute allows as low as 20 years for a second-degree murder. It allows that. And that's what I'm asking, for the low end. Set that high end high, and this 17-year-old kid can start to process that it is on him. He took a life, the court has to consequent him. But if he works hard, if he changes, if he transforms, then he has hope. If he slides back into what he knows, if he slides into chaos and booze and fighting and malignant influences, that's on him too. He would do the high end instead of the low end. But please give him hope. He never had a chance to avoid the malignant influences in his life. Even his grandmother was alcoholic when he went to stay with her. What now feels like an inevitable result, parents and parents of his friends reaping what they 100% sowed, the law can't hold them responsible for their roles in this terrible, awful situation. But because of their malignant influence, Devante never had a chance to be someone different. So it is ironic, it is surreal, and it is heartbreaking that Devante's first chance to be someone different, someone better, is on the day that he's sentenced for second-degree murder. A prison sentence that starts at 20 years and goes up, depending on his commitment to transform. That is giving him the chance that the adults in his first 17 years of life did not give him. And I'm still talking because when I stop, then I'm out of chances to say something that can help. And I desperately want to not be the next adult in Devante's life to fail him. I don't want to fail him as a professional with a duty of care to him, and I don't want to fail him as a human being that for whatever reason God brought me into his path. Redemption is possible for Devante. He can do this. He needs help. He needs that chance. That's my request, Your Honor.